Emma Wilson stared at her empty ring finger, the pale band of skin where her wedding ring had once resided, standing out like a silent accusation against her flesh. 23 years of marriage, summarized in that small circle of lighter skin. She ran her thumb over the spot, feeling phantom metal, as though her body still couldn't accept what her mind had discovered 3 days ago. The morning had begun like any other Tuesday in their suburban Connecticut home. Sunlight streamed through the kitchen windows as Emma prepared coffee, the rich aroma filling the air. David had already left for work, kissing her cheek with absent familiarity before hurrying out the door. It wasn't until she was washing her hands after gardening that she noticed. Her wedding ring was gone. At first, she assumed it had slipped off while working with the soil. Emma spent 2 frantic hours on her knees, combing through the garden bed, sifting dirt through trembling fingers. When that yielded nothing, she retraced every step she'd taken that morning, checking between couch cushions, under furniture, and in every drain. "This can't be happening," she whispered to the empty house, her voice bouncing off walls that had witnessed 23 years of their shared life. The walls that had absorbed their laughter, arguments, whispered dreams, and lately, growing silences. Emma called David 3 times. Each call went straight to voicemail. By evening, a different possibility had taken root in her mind, one she refused to acknowledge until she saw him walk through their front door at 6:37, his shoulders hunched as though carrying an invisible weight. "Did you find it?" he asked, setting down his briefcase by the door. His voice was strained, eyes avoiding hers. Emma stood perfectly still in the center of their living room. "Find what, David?" A beat passed. 2. The grandfather clock in the hallway, a wedding gift from his parents, ticked loudly in the silence. "Your ring," he finally said, loosening his tie with fingers that didn't quite seem steady. "I noticed it was missing this morning." "How could you notice something was missing from my hand?" Emma said carefully, "when I didn't notice it myself until after you left." The color drained from David's face. At 49, time had been kind to him. Salt and pepper hair that made him look distinguished rather than old. Laugh lines that framed eyes the color of aged bourbon. But in that moment, he looked every one of his years, and then some. "Em, I need to tell you something." The world slowed. Emma could hear her heartbeat in her ears, could feel every molecule of air between them charged with something terrible. "I sold your ring." 4 words. 4 small words that crashed through their living room like a wrecking ball, destroying everything in their path. "You did what?" Her voice didn't sound like her own. It was too calm, too controlled for the hurricane, spinning inside her chest. David's words tumbled out in a desperate rush. "I had debts, gambling debts. They were threatening to come after the house, after you. I tried everything else, I swear. But I was running out of options, and the ring was valuable enough to buy me time. My grandmother's ring." Emma's voice was barely audible now. "The ring that survived the Depression, because she refused to sell it even when they had nothing. The ring she gave to me on her deathbed." I know, David said, taking a step toward her. "I'm going to get it back, I promise. It's just a temporary solution. Stop." Emma held up a hand. "Don't come any closer." He froze, his face a portrait of misery. "You took something that didn't belong to you," she said, each word clear and precise. "You didn't ask. You didn't tell me about these supposed debts. You just took it while I was sleeping." David swallowed hard. "I was ashamed. And now I'm ashamed," Emma replied. "Ashamed that I didn't notice what was happening. Ashamed that I trusted you so completely that I didn't even think to check my own husband might be stealing from me." The silence that followed was deafening. 23 years of shared history hung between them. The births of their children, now grown and living their own lives. The loss of parents, career successes and failures. Homes bought and sold, anniversaries celebrated and sometimes forgotten. All of it suddenly cast in a new light. "Where did you sell it?" she finally asked. "Markham's Jewelry downtown." Emma nodded once, processing this information with a strange detachment. She felt as though she were floating above the scene, watching herself and this stranger who wore her husband's face. "I'm going to bed," she said, turning toward the stairs. "Don't follow me. Emma, please, I said don't follow me." She paused at the foot of the stairs, not turning to look at him. "I need to think. And you need to figure out how you're going to fix this. Not just the ring, David. Everything." That night, Emma lay awake in their bed, the left side conspicuously empty. She twisted her bare ring finger, feeling phantom metal that wasn't there. It wasn't just about the physical object, she realized, as tears silently tracked down her temples and into her hair. The ring had been a symbol, a daily reminder of promises made and kept. And now its absence was a different kind of symbol. Of promises broken, of trust shattered. She could hear David downstairs, moving restlessly through the house. The refrigerator opening and closing, water running in the kitchen sink, the creak of the couch as he settled there for the night. The familiar sounds of their home now felt like the soundtrack to a stranger's life. Emma turned on her side and watched moonlight filter through the curtains, casting silver patterns across the bedroom wall. 23 years, and she'd never slept in this bed without her wedding ring. She closed her eyes, feeling something break inside her chest. Not just her heart, but something deeper. The foundation upon which she'd built her adult life had cracked, and she wasn't sure anything could repair it. In the morning, she would need to make decisions. But for now, in the darkness of a bedroom that suddenly felt too large, Emma allowed herself to grieve for what was lost. Not just a ring of gold and diamonds, but the unwavering faith she'd had in the man sleeping downstairs. 3 weeks passed, like molasses in January, thick, cold, and painfully slow. Emma moved through her days with mechanical precision, a well-programmed robot performing the functions of a wife, without the emotional connection that had once made those actions meaningful. She still prepared breakfast each morning, though now it consisted of 2 plates set at opposite ends of their kitchen table. She still did their laundry, though she no longer folded David's t-shirts with the particular care she'd always taken before. She still asked about his day, though the questions were perfunctory, her attention already drifting before he could finish his equally perfunctory answers. The house was filled with a silence so profound it seemed to have physical weight. It pressed down on their shoulders at dinner, filled the spaces between words with lead, and stretched the minutes into hours. David had tried, at first. He'd brought home flowers 3 days after his confession, pink roses that had always been her favorite. Emma had placed them in a vase with water, murmured a polite "thank you," and then left them on the kitchen counter until they drooped and died, petals falling like tears onto the granite. He'd suggested dinner at Giovanni's, where he'd proposed 24 years earlier. Emma had declined, claiming a headache that wasn't entirely fabricated. The thought of sitting across from him in that intimate lighting, pretending that everything was normal, had made her physically ill. By the second week, David had stopped trying so hard. A new kind of tension had replaced his initial panic. A resentful awareness that his apologies weren't working as quickly as he'd expected. He began arriving home later, his explanations about work demands falling into the vacuum between them. Emma wasn't sure what hurt more, his initial betrayal or his apparent expectation that she should simply get over it, as though selling her. Grandmother's wedding ring without permission was equivalent to forgetting to pick up milk on the way home. On Tuesday of the 3rd week, Emma found herself standing before the bathroom mirror, studying her reflection with clinical detachment. At 47, she was still attractive, her chestnut hair now threaded with silver that she refused to color, laugh lines etched around eyes that had seen both joy and sorrow. Those eyes looked different now, though. Harder, wiser perhaps, but less trusting. She lifted her left hand, examining the pale band where her ring had been. The skin was returning to its normal color now, the physical evidence of her marriage literally fading away. Emma wasn't sure how she felt about that. The memory of receiving that ring surfaced unbidden. Her grandmother, Eliza, had been 93 and bedridden, her once robust frame diminished to bird-like proportions. But her mind had remained sharp until the end, her eyes bright with the wisdom of nearly a century of living. "Come closer, child," Eliza had whispered, her voice papery thin but insistent. Emma had leaned down, and her grandmother had pressed something into her palm, a small circle of gold topped with a modest diamond flanked by 2 smaller sapphires. 67 years I wore this, Eliza had told her, through wars and peace, wealth and poverty, joy and heartbreak. Your grandfather wanted to sell it during the worst of the Depression. We had no food and 3 children to feed. Her fragile fingers had closed around Emma's. I told him I'd sooner cut off my finger than sell this ring. Not because it was valuable, it wasn't, really, but because it was the promise we made to each other. Some promises you don't break, no matter how hungry you get. Emma had worn that ring for her wedding to David 6 months later. Eliza had been gone by then, but Emma had felt her presence as David slid the ring onto her finger, his eyes shining with promises that had seemed unbreakable at the time. Now, standing in their bathroom 24 years later, Emma splashed cold water on her face, letting it shock her out of memory and back into her present reality. She dried her face with a fluffy towel, part of a set they'd received for their 20th anniversary, and headed downstairs to prepare a dinner neither of them would enjoy. The kitchen was her domain, a space where she had always found comfort, in the precise measurements of baking, or the intuitive adjustments of cooking. Today, she chopped vegetables with unnecessary force, the knife coming down on the cutting board with sharp, angry thuds. Careful there. David's voice came from the doorway, startling her. He rarely came home before 6 these days. Emma set down, the knife carefully. "You're early." Meeting ended sooner than expected. He hovered in the doorway, as though unsure of his welcome in his own kitchen. "Need help?" "No." The word came out sharper than she'd intended. Emma took a breath. "No, thank you. Dinner will be ready in 20 minutes. David nodded, then lingered. Don't." She picked up the knife again, resuming her chopping with renewed vigor. "Not now." Another nod, and he retreated to his home office, closing the door with a soft click that somehow seemed louder than a slam would have been. Dinner was a silent affair, broken only by the scrape of utensils against plates and the occasional request to pass the salt. Emma found herself studying David when he wasn't looking, the new lines around his mouth, the slight stoop to shoulders that had once stood military straight. He looked older, worn down by the weight of his secrets and her silence. "I spoke to Thomas today," David said suddenly, mentioning their 21-year-old son who was currently studying abroad in Spain. Emma's fork paused halfway to her mouth. "How is he?" "Good. Loving Barcelona. Says the architecture is even more impressive than the pictures in his textbooks." David's voice held a note of forced cheerfulness. "He asked about you. Said you haven't been answering his texts." Guilt washed over Emma. She'd been so absorbed in her private pain that she'd neglected even her children. "I'll call him tomorrow," she promised, meaning it. David nodded, seemingly encouraged by this small moment of normal conversation. "And Lily called yesterday while you were at your book club. She's been accepted for that summer internship in Chicago." "That's wonderful." A genuine smile touched Emma's lips for the first time in weeks. Their 19-year-old daughter had been anxiously waiting to hear about the prestigious architectural internship. "I'll call her tonight." The moment of warmth faded as quickly as it had appeared, leaving them once again adrift in the sea of what remained unsaid. Emma cleared the table while David loaded the dishwasher, their movements a carefully choreographed dance to avoid physical contact. Later, after David had retreated to the guest room that had tacitly become his bedroom, Emma sat in their home office, staring at the blank screen of her laptop. She opened a new document and began to type, her fingers finding words for feelings she couldn't yet voice aloud. Dear David, I keep thinking about the moment I realized my ring was missing. That split second of confusion, followed by panic, followed by the sick certainty that something was deeply wrong. I wonder if you felt anything similar when you slipped it from my finger while I slept. Did your hand tremble? Did you hesitate? Or was it merely a transaction by then? A means to an end? I've spent 3 weeks trying to understand. Not just why you took it, but why you didn't tell me about the gambling, about the debts. We've faced hard times before. We survived the recession when you were laid off. We made it through my father's medical bills and your mother's long decline. We did it together, shoulder to shoulder, a united front against whatever life threw at us. Or so I thought. But you chose to face this alone. Worse, you chose to betray me rather than confide in me. And I'm left wondering what that says about how you see me, how you see us. I keep washing my hands and feeling the absence of my ring. It's like a phantom limb, gone but still somehow there. Maybe that's what our marriage has become, something that no longer exists in reality, but that I can still feel, an echo of what once was. I don't know if I can forgive you. More importantly, I don't know if I can trust you again. And without trust, what do we have? 23 years of shared history, yes. 2 wonderful children, absolutely. A house filled with memories, certainly. But a marriage? I'm no longer sure. Emma. She stared at the screen for a long moment, then saved the document without printing it. These words weren't ready to be shared. Perhaps they never would be. But something about writing them down had shifted something inside her. The knot of pain in her chest loosened slightly, allowing her to take the first deep breath she'd managed in 3 weeks. Emma closed the laptop and moved to the window, gazing out at the streetlights illuminating their quiet neighborhood. Across the street, the Johnsons' living room lights were on, silhouettes moving in what looked like a family game night. 2 doors down, the Patels' new baby was likely being rocked to sleep. All around them, lives were being lived, relationships growing stronger or weaker with each passing day. She pressed her forehead against the cool glass, her bare ring finger tracing patterns on the window pane. 23 years was a long time to invest in another person. Too long to walk away without fighting for what they'd built. But fighting required strength, and right now, Emma wasn't sure how much strength she had left. As she turned from the window, her gaze fell on a photograph hanging in the hallway. Emma and David on their 20th anniversary, foreheads touching, laughing at some shared joke while their children rolled their eyes good-naturedly in the background. They had looked so happy, so connected. Had it been real? Or had the cracks been forming even then? Hairline fractures in the foundation that she'd been too blind to see. Emma didn't have answers, only questions that circled her mind like restless birds. But as she prepared for another night of fitful sleep, one thing became clear. She couldn't continue in this limbo indefinitely. Something would have to change, and soon. On the 23rd day of their silent war, something changed. Emma sensed it the moment David walked through the front door at 5:15, 45 minutes earlier than his recent pattern. There was something different about his posture, something altered in the careful way he set down his briefcase and hung up his coat. Emma stood in the kitchen doorway, dish towel in hand, watching as he straightened his shoulders like a man preparing to face a firing squad. When he turned and saw her, his eyes held a new emotion, not the defensive guilt of recent weeks, nor the frustrated impatience that had followed. Instead, she saw a vulnerable hope that made her breath catch. "Hi," he said simply. "You're early," she replied, an echo of words spoken many times over the past few weeks. but somehow different now. David nodded, his hands fidgeting slightly before disappearing into his pockets. I wanted to catch you before dinner preparations. I was hoping we could talk. Emma considered this request, weighing it against the wall she'd carefully constructed between them. Finally, she nodded once. Let me finish drying these dishes first. Can I help? He asked, his voice careful, like someone approaching a wounded animal. A brief hesitation, then, sure. They worked in silence for several minutes, David drying plates and stacking them with excessive care while Emma washed the remaining pots from her afternoon baking. The familiar domestic rhythm felt both strange and comforting, like returning to a childhood home now occupied by new owners. When the last pot was dried and put away, Emma turned to face him fully. What did you want to talk about? David took a deep breath. Not here. Can we sit down? They moved to the living room, taking seats at opposite ends of the sofa, where they had once curled together watching classic films on Sunday afternoons. The distance between them might have been measured in inches, but it felt like miles. David reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew a small box, not velvet like the original that had held her grandmother's ring, but a simple cardboard jewelry box with a retailer's logo Emma didn't recognize. I've been trying to find the right words for 3 weeks, he began, his voice low and rough with emotion. I've written speeches and torn them up. I've practiced apologies in the car during my commute. None of them seemed adequate. He set the box on the coffee table between them. Nothing I can say will undo what I did, but I need you to know how profoundly sorry I am, Emma. Emma stared at the box, not reaching for it. Is that... No, David interrupted quickly, his face flushing. It's not your grandmother's ring. I'm still working on getting that back. He swallowed hard. This is just a placeholder, a promise that I'm going to make this right. Emma's throat tightened. You sold it. How can you possibly get it back? I've been working overtime, taking on extra projects. I've spoken to Markham, and he's agreed to hold it for me until I can buy it back. David leaned forward, his eyes never leaving her face. I've also been seeing someone. Emma's heart stuttered painfully. A therapist, David clarified quickly, seeing her expression. For the gambling, twice a week since that night. I should have done it years ago, but I was too proud, too ashamed. His voice cracked slightly. I've been gambling since college, Emma. It started with poker games. In the dorm, then sports betting, then online poker. I'd stop for months, sometimes years, then start again when work got stressful or when I thought I needed a win. Emma closed her eyes briefly, memories reassembling themselves in light of this new information. The late nights he'd claimed were work. The mood swings that seemed tied to certain sporting events. The occasional financial crunches that never quite made sense given their income. Why didn't you tell me? She asked, opening her eyes to find him watching her with naked anguish. Because you married a different man, he answered simply. You married someone responsible, someone worthy of your trust and respect. I couldn't bear to let you see this weakness, this addiction. He pronounced the last word with difficulty, as though it physically hurt to say aloud. Each time I stopped, I convinced myself it was over for good, that you never needed to know, until you ran out of options, Emma said, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside. David nodded miserably. The debt got out of control this last time. I borrowed money from people I shouldn't have. When they threatened to come to our home, to involve you and the kids, I panicked. He ran a hand through his hair, leaving it standing in disheveled spikes. I pawned my watch first, then my grandfather's cufflinks. But it wasn't enough. So you took my ring while I slept. Emma finished for him, the image still painful enough to make her wince. Yes. The word seemed to physically pain him, It's the worst thing I've ever done, Emma. Not just because it was valuable to you, but because it represented everything I was destroying. Your trust, our history, my integrity. He gestured toward the box. I know this can't replace what I took. Nothing can. But I wanted you to have something to wear until I can get your real ring back. Emma finally reached for the box, opening it slowly. Inside lay a simple band of white gold, similar in style to her grandmother's ring, but without the diamond and sapphires. It was clearly not expensive. Probably the best he could afford given his financial situation. I'm not asking for forgiveness, David continued softly. I haven't earned that yet. I'm just asking for a chance to try and make things right. Not just the ring, but everything. Emma lifted the ring from the box, feeling its lightness compared to the substantial weight of her grandmother's ring. She turned it in her fingers, watching how it caught the late afternoon light streaming through the windows. I've been trying to understand why I'm so hurt, she said finally, her voice thoughtful. It's not just about the ring, although that matters deeply to me. It's what it represented. You didn't just take a piece of jewelry, David. You took my choice. You decided that your problems were yours alone to solve, that I wasn't to be trusted with the truth that my most precious possession was yours to dispose of. She looked up at him, her eyes clear and direct. You made me irrelevant in my own marriage. David flinched as though she'd struck him. Emma, no. Let me finish, she said quietly but firmly. For 3 weeks I've been waiting for something, not just an apology, but a sign that you understand what was really broken here. It wasn't just trust, David. It was partnership. It was respect. She closed her fingers around the simple band. This ring isn't my grandmother's. It doesn't carry her history or her strength. But it does tell me something important, that you're finally willing to be honest, to be vulnerable, to admit that you can't fix this alone. She met his gaze steadily. That's a start. Does that mean, David began, hope threading through his voice. It means I'll wear this ring while you work to get back the original, Emma interrupted. It means I'm willing to see where your actions take us, not just listen to your words. It means I'm not leaving, at least not yet. She slipped the simple band onto her finger, where it sat loosely, slightly too large for her slender hand. But David, I need you to understand something. I'm not the same woman I was 3 weeks ago. The Emma who trusted blindly, who put your needs before her own without question, who built her entire identity around being your wife. She's gone. David nodded slowly, pain and understanding mingling in his expression. I want to know this, Emma, he said quietly. I want to be worthy of her trust, even if I have to earn it back, penny by penny. Day by day, Emma stood, suddenly exhausted by the emotional weight of their conversation. It's a beginning, she acknowledged, but the rest will take time. And work from both of us. As she moved toward the stairs, David's voice stopped her. Emma? She turned, one hand on the banister. Thank you, he said simply, for not giving up on us completely. Emma didn't respond immediately, studying the unfamiliar ring on her finger. Finally, she looked back at him. 23 years is a long time to share with someone. It deserves at least a fighting chance. That night, as Emma prepared for bed, she found herself staring at the simple band on her finger. It felt wrong. Too light, too loose, too new. But it also represented something important. A bridge back to possibility, if not certainty. She thought of the look in David's eyes as he'd presented it to her, not demanding forgiveness, not expecting an immediate return to normalcy, but offering a humble beginning. The David she'd married would never have admitted weakness, would have bristled at the suggestion he needed help. This new David, stripped of pretense by his own terrible choices, seemed different. Broken, yes, but perhaps more authentic than he'd been in years. As she turned out the light, Emma wondered what tomorrow would bring. Not healing. That would take far longer than a single conversation. But perhaps the start of understanding. The first tentative step on a long road back to each other, or toward something new entirely. The simple ring caught the moonlight as she settled into bed, a pale gleam in the darkness. Not her grandmother's ring, with its weight of history and meaning, but a placeholder, a promise, a possibility. For tonight, it would have to be enough.